So focusing again today on Psalm 69, one of the Messianic Psalms, as we've been doing now for several months. And I wonder if you notice, as we read through the section this morning, the connection between Psalm 69 and Jesus. Did you see those times, those references to the life of the Lord? Verse 4, for example, is, "Those who hated me without a cause are more than the hairs on my head." This is referred to directly in John chapter 15. Verse 9, "Because zeal for your house has eaten me up." Again, referred to in John's Gospel, chapter 2, the clearing of the temple. Verse 21, which we didn't read, "They gave me gall for my food, and for my thirst they gave me vinegar to drink." There is the Lord on the cross. In verses 22 and 23, these are quoted in the epistle to the Romans by Paul. And also is quoted by Paul is verse 25. But I wonder if you notice the connection of Psalm 69 to someone else. And it's Jonah. In actual fact, the prayer of Jonah from the belly of the whale is thought to be a direct quote from this psalm, the beginning of this psalm. And then, of course, there's the connection between Jesus and Jonah also, which is spelt out in the Gospels. And I read that earlier, one of the versions from Luke chapter 11. There's that direct connection to the sign of Jonah. But what is the sign of Jonah? So the sign of Jonah is that Jonah is in the belly of the whale for 3 days. Where is Jesus for 3 days? He was buried. Yes, that's right. He'd been buried in the cave, hadn't he? And he rose again after 3 days. This is what we connect to as the sign of Jonah that's being spoken of here. But the interesting thing about that is the sign of Jonah Jesus speaks about is in the middle of the book of Jonah. It's chapter 2, when Jonah has been swallowed by the whale. He's then regurgitated up on shore, and it's not the end of Jonah's story, is it? Jonah then goes to Nineveh and preaches to the Ninevites. And we learn from the story and from what we read in chapter 4, Jonah really hasn't changed very much. He explains again in chapter 4, the whole reason why he'd run away from the Lord, he'd run away to Tarshish, was to get away from this mission because he knew that God was gracious and would relent from causing the great destruction that he's been asked to prophesy to Nineveh. And at the end of the book even, we read right through to the end of the book of Jonah, we never actually know whether Jonah has changed his mind. The book of Jonah finishes with the words of the Lord, not with the word of Jonah, with no account of whether Jonah has relented and decided he's wrong or not. We're left to answer that one for ourselves. So why is it that Jesus quotes the sign of Jonah, an incomplete story, when he speaks about the resurrection? Our understanding of Jesus' crucifixion, his death and his resurrection is fundamentally different from many churches. We don't talk about Jesus' resurrection or his crucifixion and his raising from the dead as an appeasement to a righteous and angry God, to a God who cannot stand to look upon sinful humanity without an atoning sacrifice. We do not talk about that event in those ways. We do not talk about it being a guarantee of salvation for those who say they believe in Jesus. Rather, we talk about it as re-establishing the possibility of change. So God has come into the world to give us another chance, give us another opportunity. And it's that picture of the resurrection which is consistent with the story of Jonah. Because there is the Lord giving Jonah another chance, irrespective of whether Jonah has actually changed his mind or not. Now, the book of Jonah is very unusual in the prophecies. Because if you read most of the prophets of the Old Testament, their job is to stand up and tell the Israelites everything they're doing wrong. He tells them all the ways that they've misunderstood, all the things that they're doing wrong, all the ways that they need to change. Jonah doesn't do that. Jonah actually embodies the errors of the children of Israel. He actually lives them out. He goes to Nineveh and speaks judgment against it because that is the attitude that his countrymen have to all other nations around them. So he embodies their errors and he actually lives out Psalm 69. Jonah's story is the one we remember. If I were to ask you the story of the prophet of Amos, for example, would you remember the story of the prophet of Amos? Do you know Amos's story? Do you know Habakkuk's story? You don't. We remember Jonah's story because of the way he embodies the lesson of the book. It's a very creative way of approaching things. The sea that Jonah falls into, the sea that is referred to in the book, in the Psalm 69, we come to think of as representing our natural level of existence, to live in a natural way. And it's said here that this is to sink in deep mire. There is no standing in it. There's no firm foundation. There's no grounds on which actually to base one's life in our natural level of existence. When Jesus calls the disciples, who are fishermen, remember what Jesus said, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." And as much as that process of being a fisher of men is a call to the gospel, it's also a call out of a natural way of life to something spiritual, something actually real. And Jonah's intention in crossing the sea, taking that journey to Tarshish, is actually to use the natural details of his religion to escape from this God he knows to be loving. That's what he's doing. He's using his religion to put himself as far away from these people in Nineveh as he possibly can. And this is what we do with our religion very often. We use our religion to separate ourselves from other people. We judge them. We say, oh, they're not good. I've got nothing to do with them. I'm over here. That's the picture of Jonah's attempted journey to Tarshish. We talked a couple of weeks ago about what a spiritual focus is. Do you remember that? We were talking about this word spiritual. What does a spiritual life look like? How does it manifest in the world? Well, it might not look very different from what we already do. It might not be so very different from our existing ordinary lives. It's very important we don't get caught up in the need to convert someone to our way of thinking, because that's to be buried in this natural focus. If we believe everybody has to think the way we do, that is a natural focus, and we won't find any joy in that idea. We shouldn't get caught up in the idea of punishment or of retribution or being proved to be right or righteous either. These are all natural aspects. These are natural things. They're natural tendencies that won't help us really have a spiritual life. I've seen a couple of memes recently critical of Islam for the idea of the jihad. You're all familiar with the jihad. It's been floating around for the last 2 decades, hasn't it? Particularly in the wake of 9/11, but then in the decades before as well. You see, we get so caught up in the same problem ourselves. We get so caught up in the sense that those people over there are my enemies and I need to punish them for it. And somehow that makes me righteous. That is not the spiritual life. Last week, when we were starting to read the Last Judgment, we read these words. To create means, in the spiritual sense of the word, to form, set up, and regenerate. A new creation is a reformed person. When we're talking about a spiritual life, we're not talking about a reformed natural. We're not talking about a change in the external circumstances of our lives. We're talking about a change within. The Lord reforms our inner being, and then from that, perhaps we see manifestation or some expression of that spiritual life out in the natural world. And for some people, it looks the same as it always did. And for some people, it doesn't. We should never try to shoehorn the spiritual life into our particular box. So, Jesus said to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, "The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear the sound of it, but cannot tell where it comes from and where it goes. So is everyone who is born of the Spirit." Did you hear that? We cannot tell where it comes from or where it goes. We have no control over it whatsoever. We cannot see where it is going to lead. Only the Lord does. As we reflected a couple of weeks ago, one of the things I think we can be confident with in regard to the spiritual life and spiritual awakening is it is not an easy path for any of us. So we go to the first few verses again in Psalm 69, where the psalmist writes, "Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no standing. I have come into deep waters where the floods overflow me." And we need to get to that place if we are to live a spiritual life where we recognize that the natural focus in life is not going to serve us. Whatever that looks like, it is not going to serve us. We need to find something deeper on which to base our faith. So our foundation is never found in the distinctions of one religion against another. We must find it in the life of religion, which is to do good. It is the regeneration of the inner life, which is then given expression in our natural actions. I'm going to invite you in the week ahead to, if you've got the time, spend some time with Psalm 69, with Luke chapter 11, as we read earlier, and with the prophecy of Jonah as a whole. Jonah is quite a short book. And see if you can see the correlation between those three readings. And see in the midst of all of that whether you can find a firm foothold for your faith, because it is not a natural faith. It is not the sense of we're here and the rest of the world is out there, so they're all condemned. That's not what it's about at all. Find that spiritual element to your faith and find out what that truly looks like. What is the thing that you can found your faith upon? What is the change that the Lord is calling you to?